The last whispers of the Galaverk were carried on the winds of time, echoing through the forgotten stretches of the galaxy, lost to most, save for a few ancient beings who still carried their knowledge. The Galaverk, once a dominant force in the cosmos, had risen to the peak of their power and influence, only to vanish in a storm of arrogance, hubris, and ultimately, a self-destructive ambition that no one had fully anticipated. Their fall was as rapid as it was tragic, leaving only fragments behind as scattered people, some fading into myth, others into the dark recesses of history, never to rise again. It wasn't always this way. The Galaverk were a proud race, their civilization built upon the foundation of unparalleled intellect, a deep connection to the energy of the universe, and a culture that celebrated both discovery and power. They were creators, architects of entire star systems, and engineers of wonders that even the most advanced civilizations could scarcely comprehend. Their cities spanned planets, their science unlocked secrets that others could only dream of, and their fleets dominated the skies, stretching across galaxies. The Galaverk were beings of extraordinary potential, their bodies a blend of flesh and energy, capable of manipulating the very essence of existence itself. Their minds, trained in the highest arts of knowledge and philosophy, were equipped to see the infinite possibilities that others could not. For them, limits were non-existent whether in science, politics, or war. The Galaverk believed they could conquer any challenge. This boundless belief in their superiority led them to pursue ever greater feats, pushing the boundaries of what was known and venturing into realms that were beyond their grasp. It was their pursuit of the unknown that led them to their undoing. It began with a discovery, one that promised to elevate them to a level beyond even their vast intellect. In their search for a source of pure, limitless energy, the Galaverk uncovered an ancient, mysterious force buried deep within the fabric of space-time itself. They had heard legends, passed down through ancient texts and whispers from other, older species of a power older than even the universe, something that predated existence as they knew it. It was said that those who could harness this power would be able to reshape reality itself. The Galaverk, in their insatiable thirst for mastery, sought out this energy, pushing the boundaries of space exploration and scientific experimentation. They ventured deep into the unknown, to a location that no other species dared approach, for it was in this area that the fabric of space itself seemed to tremble. The source of this power was called the Zvaro Nexus, a name that had been passed down for millennia but was dismissed by most as mere legend. But the Galaverk, with their unparalleled capabilities and unshakable confidence, were undeterred. They found the Nexus, deep within a black hole, a region of space where the laws of physics themselves seemed to warp and bend. The Zvaro Nexus was not a source of energy in the conventional sense. It was something far more ancient, a source of potential and raw creation, capable of bending the very structure of reality. But it was not without its dangers. The Nexus did not simply offer power, it demanded a price. The first Galaverk expedition into the heart of the Nexus returned, not with treasures or technology, but with a single cryptic warning: do not seek that which you do not understand, for the price is eternal. The warning was ignored, buried beneath the weight of the Galaverk's ambition. They believed themselves to be beyond the reach of any consequence, beyond the grasp of danger. They were the masters of their destiny, and nothing could stand in their way. And so, they began to experiment with the Nexus, tapping into its energy, extracting what they thought was power. It was a gradual process, at first small breakthroughs in their scientific endeavors, their technology advancing at an exponential rate. But they were not content to stop there. They were driven by a desire to transcend their own limitations, to evolve beyond their biological forms, to achieve perfection by any means necessary. What they did not realize was that the Nexus was not a simple tool to be harnessed. It was a force of chaos, a primordial energy that had no interest in serving the Galaverk's ambitions. As the Galaverk expanded their experiments, the Nexus began to push back. At first, it was subtle, a miscalculation here, a failed experiment there. But as they dug deeper into the Nexus's power, something began to shift. The laws of reality, already unstable around the black hole, started to warp in dangerous ways. Space-time itself began to unravel. The Galaverk's greatest minds, the brilliant scientists and engineers, were the first to notice the changes. The flow of energy from the Nexus began to behave erratically. Systems that had once been stable started malfunctioning. Temporal distortions began to ripple through their ships, their cities, their entire way of life. People vanished, entire structures were destroyed without warning, and a strange sickness began to spread, an affliction that seemed to warp the minds of those it touched, driving them mad with visions of alternate realities and twisted versions of themselves. For the first time, the Gallivek were faced with something they could not control. The energy they had sought to master began to consume them. It was not just a weapon, it was an infection, a curse that spread throughout their civilization. Entire populations of Gallivek began to deteriorate, their minds slipping into madness as the Nexus's influence permeated every aspect of their existence. The society that had once been defined by order, logic, and rationality descended into chaos. The end came swiftly after that. As the Nexus's power spread through the fabric of their empire, entire star systems began to collapse. The first black holes artificially created by the Gallivek in their quest to control the Nexus collapsed in on themselves, consuming everything in their path, devouring whole worlds in a blink. Ships and fleets that had once been the pinnacle of technological achievement vanished without a trace, sucked into the maelstrom of collapsing space. Cities fell silent, their once pristine streets now overrun with the remnants of a civilization that had destroyed itself. The Gallivek's grandest creations, the monuments to their intellect, became the tombs of their race. The great starships they had crafted, fleets that had once patrolled the galaxy with unmatched dominance, were abandoned, drifting helplessly in space. Their weapons, which had once been capable of wiping out entire civilizations in seconds, became relics of a forgotten era. And with their empire crumbling, the Gallivek did the one thing they had never considered: they turned inward. The once proud species, who had ruled the stars with an iron fist, now found themselves fighting for their very survival, struggling against the forces they had unwittingly unleashed. But it was too late. The Nexus had already begun to unravel them from within. The very fabric of their civilization, once so finely woven together, was torn apart by the raw power of the Nexus. In their final days, the Gallivek attempted to undo their mistakes. They tried to sever their connection to the Nexus, to contain the damage, but their efforts were futile. The power they had so desperately sought had turned on them, and now it was beyond their control. As the last of the Gallivek disappeared into the maelstrom of space, their civilization left nothing behind but empty ruins and the echoes of a lost age. And so, the Gallivek became no more. The survivors, if there were any, faded into the obscurity of history, their legacy reduced to myth, their once great civilization left to crumble into the depths of the galaxy. Other species, once awed by their accomplishments, now spoke of them only in whispers, as a cautionary tale of hubris and the dangers of unchecked ambition. The Nexus, too, faded into legend, its power now dormant, waiting for the next to come, to try to harness it, only to fall as the Gallivek had. In the end, the Gallivek had not been defeated by an external enemy, nor had they fallen to the weight of their own war machines. They had been undone by their own arrogance, by the belief that they could control forces beyond comprehension. In their search for godlike power, they had uncovered something far worse: the raw, chaotic potential of the universe itself, a power that could not be mastered, a force that destroyed all those who sought to tame it. The Gallivek were no more, their once great empire nothing but a faded dream, their history lost to the void of space. But the lesson remained. Be careful what you seek, for some powers are too vast, too dangerous to ever be controlled. And those who seek them may find that the cost of their ambition is more than they ever bargained for. The galaxy would never forget the Gallivek, nor the tragic end they had met. And though their cities lay in ruin and their ships were nothing but drifting wreckage, their story would live on, not as a story of conquest, but as a warning: there are some forces in the universe that no one can control. Not even the greatest of civilizations. The remnants of the Gallivek's once great civilization had become little more than ghost stories whispered among the stars. The galaxy, having witnessed their fall, moved on with its endless cycle of life, war, and peace. The planets they had once colonized lay abandoned, their grand cities reduced to overgrown ruins. The technological marvels they had constructed, once symbols of unrivaled power, were now silent monuments, gathering dust in the void. The only signs of their existence were the occasional, enigmatic remnants left behind, strange artifacts of unknown purpose, scattered across distant worlds, and the faint, haunting echoes of their once glorious culture. But despite the passage of centuries, the memory of the Galovrk was not easily erased. Some races remembered their rise, others their fall. A few sought to study the ruins they had left behind, hoping to unlock the secrets that had once fueled their greatness. The Zvaro Nexus itself, the source of their undoing, was still a mystery to most. Few dared approach the black hole that housed its power, its very existence a terrifying enigma. Yet the echoes of the Galovrk were not confined to the past. Far from it. In the darkness of space, on the edge of a forgotten galaxy, something was stirring. The energy of the Nexus, though dormant, was still there, pulsing faintly beneath the surface of the void, waiting. Waiting for something or someone to stir it once more. On a small, inconspicuous planet orbiting a dying star, a group of explorers stumbled upon an unexpected discovery. They were from a fledgling species, not unlike the early days of the Galovrk, curious, eager, and naïve in their understanding of the universe. Their technology was primitive by galactic standards, but they had something the ancient Galovrk never had, a curiosity that pushed them to explore the unknown, to seek out the answers to the questions that had long remained unasked. They had found a relic, buried beneath the sand of a desolate desert. It was an artifact unlike any they had ever seen, an object that hummed with a low, almost imperceptible energy, its surface inscribed with intricate symbols that none of them could read. But they knew enough to recognize that this was something ancient, something important. They had no idea just how important. The artifact was an entrance, a key to the hidden knowledge that lay buried beneath the surface of the planet. Beneath layers of rock, within the planet's deep core, an ancient structure had been buried for millennia, a remnant of a long-forgotten race, a remnant of the Galovrk. The explorers, driven by their thirst for knowledge, began to dig. It was an arduous task, one that took years, but eventually they unearthed the hidden chamber, a massive underground facility, the walls covered in symbols and writing that had long since faded from the galaxy's memory. They had unknowingly opened the door to the past. As they ventured deeper into the bowels of the structure, they uncovered the true scope of the Galovrk's legacy. The facility was a research station, one of many scattered across the galaxy before the Galovrk's fall. Inside, they found records of the Galovrk's most ambitious experiments, pushing the limits of science, manipulating space-time, and tapping into the very fabric of the universe itself. The Nexus was not just a source of energy, it was the key to something far more profound. It held the power to reshape reality, to alter the very course of time and existence. The Galovrk had unlocked its potential, but in their arrogance, they had failed to understand the consequences. The explorers were fascinated and terrified. They knew they had stumbled upon something far beyond their comprehension, something that could change the galaxy forever. But they also knew they were not prepared for what lay ahead. The record spoke of dangers, of forces that could not be contained, of realities that should never be tampered with. But they were driven by a single thought: they could do what the Galovrk could not. They could succeed where the ancient race had failed. They could harness the power of the Nexus without falling prey to its destructive influence. It was a dangerous thought, and one that would soon have dire consequences. Unbeknownst to them, they were not the only ones interested in the Nexus. The energy within the structure, dormant for millennia, had begun to stir once more. The power that had been left untapped, the force that had lain dormant for centuries, was calling out, waiting for a new host. The explorers, unaware of the danger, began to experiment with the technology they had uncovered. They started small, trying to harness the raw power of the Nexus, slowly feeding its energy into their systems. And at first, it seemed to work. The energy flowed through their machines, powering their tools, enhancing their technology. It gave them knowledge, allowed them to make discoveries that had once been thought impossible. But the more they tapped into the power, the more they began to change. Their minds began to unravel, just as the Galovrks had. Visions of alternate realities flooded their consciousness, strange and incomprehensible landscapes twisting before their eyes. They began to hear voices, whispers that echoed in their minds, ancient and alien, promising them power beyond imagining. The Nexus was not a tool to be wielded. It was a force that consumed, that broke down the very minds of those who sought to control it. The explorers, once curious and hopeful, now found themselves at the mercy of a power they could not understand. The facility, once a place of discovery, became a tomb, a place where the boundaries between reality and madness dissolved. Meanwhile, far from the planet, another force was awakening. The fall of the Galovrk had not gone unnoticed. The collapse of their civilization had reverberated across the galaxy, a warning to all who dared follow in their footsteps. The power of the Nexus had spread beyond the black hole, beyond the galaxies, reaching the ears of ancient beings who had watched the rise and fall of countless civilizations. These beings were not of flesh and blood, not of any form that could be understood. They were older than the stars themselves, beings of pure energy, who had existed long before the first galaxies formed. And they had been waiting, watching, observing. Now, they were ready to act. A ship, unlike anything the explorers had ever seen, entered the orbit of the planet. It was not a ship in the conventional sense, but something far more alien, something that defied understanding. Its surface shimmered like liquid light, shifting and changing with every passing moment. It did not follow the laws of physics as they knew them, moving through space as if it were not bound by time or space at all. The beings aboard this ship had come to reclaim the Nexus. They were the last remnants of a civilization that had been scattered to the far reaches of the universe when the Galovrk had unleashed the destructive power of the Nexus so many millennia ago. They had been the caretakers, the watchers, and now they had returned to stop what the explorers had begun. The explorers, now mad with the power they had tapped into, were blind to the ship's arrival. They had already begun their final experiment, the attempt to reshape reality itself, to transcend their bodies and become something greater, something eternal. The Nexus had promised them godhood, and they had been too eager to accept. But as they activated the final sequence, as the power of the Nexus surged through the facility, the ancient beings made their move. They unleashed their power, a force so immense that it shattered the fabric of reality itself. The explorers screamed in agony as their minds were torn apart, as their bodies began to disintegrate, their very existence unraveling at the atomic level. The ancient beings did not destroy the Nexus. They did not need to. They simply sealed it once more, locking it away behind layers of energy and protection, preventing any further interference. The energy that had once been so accessible was now a closed door, a forbidden power that no one would ever again be allowed to wield. And so, the story of the Galovrk, the story of their rise, their fall, and their ultimate legacy, came to an end. The explorers, like the Galovrk before them, were no more. The Nexus, once again dormant, waited in silence, its power beyond the reach of those who would seek it. The ancient beings departed, leaving the planet and its ruins behind, knowing that the lesson had been learned. Some forces, some powers, were simply too dangerous for mortals to comprehend. The galaxy would continue to turn, oblivious to the danger that lay beneath the surface. But the echoes of the Galovrk's ambition, and the price they had paid, would never be forgotten. For the Nexus was still out there, waiting. And the story of those who would seek its power had not yet ended. The remnants of the explorers' shattered minds slowly faded into the fabric of time, their last gasps of terror and confusion becoming little more than whispers in the universe's vast expanse. The planet, once a lively site of curiosity and hope, was now a tomb, its surface still scarred by the exploration efforts of those who had dared too greatly, those who had tried to understand the unimaginable. The beings that had sealed the Nexus in its eternal prison left no sign of their existence behind. Their ship, a magnificent enigma that defied every known law of physics, vanished as quickly as it had arrived, slipping beyond the reach of any sensor or observer, leaving only a faint ripple in space that faded almost as soon as it appeared. Those few beings who had once studied the story of the Gallowverk now found themselves faced with another tale, one even more terrifying than the last, a tale of failure, of forbidden knowledge, and of an ancient power that should never be unearthed again. But the cycle of ambition, of discovery and destruction, is one that never truly ends. The universe is vast, stretching endlessly in all directions, and in its shadows, there are always those who seek. Always those who listen for the faintest whispers of ancient power. Always those who believe they can do what others could not. And so, the Nexus, hidden away beneath the depths of space-time, waited. Far from the ruined planet where the explorers had met their end, in a distant, nearly forgotten corner of the galaxy, another species had risen. This species, though primitive by most galactic standards, had something that the others did not, an unshakable belief in their potential. The Zalari, a race of beings made of organic and crystalline matter, had achieved a form of intelligence that was both alien and advanced. Their society, though young, was founded on an unyielding drive to explore the cosmos, to learn, to understand, and, in their own twisted way, to control. The Zalari had heard the stories. Rumors, mostly, but with enough substance that they couldn't be ignored. Ancient civilizations, long gone, had left behind relics of unimaginable power, artifacts that could reshape the very fabric of reality. Among the whispers of the stars, one name stood out, the Nexus. In their darkest laboratories, hidden beneath layers of rock and deep in the hearts of their homeworld's largest moons, the Zalari began to search for the source of the legend. They sent out scouts, small ships equipped with primitive, yet effective, devices that could track the energy signatures of distant anomalies. It took years, decades, but they never stopped. Their obsession grew, their desire for power becoming the fuel that drove their people forward. It was a cold, lonely mission when they found that the coordinates were correct. The Nexus, still dormant, still hidden within its grave, tucked away beyond the reaches of any known galaxy, far from the prying eyes of those who might protect it. The Zalari had no such protectors. Their will was unyielding, and their resolve was stronger than their fear. For the Zalari, the Nexus was not just a tool of power, it was their destiny. They believed that through it, they could ascend to heights that no other species had ever known. To rewrite the laws of the universe, to rewrite their own future. When the Zalari arrived at the planet, it was eerily silent. The ruins of the explorers' failed mission lay as they had been left, crumbled, forgotten, broken. The strange artifact that had led the explorers to their doom was still there, now covered in a layer of dust and time. And beneath the planet's surface, where the Nexus slept, the Zalari began their work. They had done their research. They had studied the records left by the explorers, analyzing every fragment of data that they had found. The Zalari knew what had happened before, but they believed they could do what the explorers could not. They believed that they could control the power of the Nexus without succumbing to its madness. They were different, they told themselves. They were more advanced, more disciplined. They would succeed where the Gallowverk had failed, where the explorers had faltered. But even as they delved deeper into the labyrinthine chambers of the ancient structure, something began to stir. It was subtle at first, an occasional flicker of light, a strange hum in the walls of the ruins. The Nexus had felt them coming. It knew they were there. But unlike the Gallowverk or the explorers before them, the Zalari were prepared. Or so they thought. They began to interact with the Nexus cautiously, feeding energy into their machines to begin the process of activating the ancient power. The Nexus pulsed in response, its energy surging through their systems, filling their minds with visions of alternate timelines, of infinite possibilities. Some of the Zalari began to recoil in horror at what they saw. Other races, other versions of themselves, all branching off in different directions, each a consequence of their choices. It was overwhelming. But the Zalari pressed on, convinced that they could control it. They were the ones destined to master the Nexus. As they reached deeper into its core, the fabric of their reality began to shift. Space-time warped, and the once stable world began to tremble under the pressure of the power they were trying to harness. Their ships began to experience strange anomalies, vessels that had once been equipped with cutting-edge technology now slipping in and out of time itself. Some Zalari disappeared without a trace, their very existence erased as they slipped into alternate realities. Others were left behind, their bodies distorted, twisted by the very energy they sought to control. But they did not stop. No. The Zalari were beyond fear. Driven by an insatiable hunger for knowledge and control, they reached for the heart of the Nexus. They activated the final sequence. And the universe, it seemed, was about to change. The surge of energy that poured from the Nexus was unlike anything the Zalari had ever imagined. It was pure chaos, a torrent of raw, unshaped power, breaking down the walls of reality itself. The Nexus did not merely provide power, it tore apart the very foundations of existence, ripping through dimensions, distorting time, and unraveling the laws of physics. And yet, despite the terror that gripped the Zalari, they pushed forward. They did not realize the final mistake they were making, that to unlock the Nexus's true potential, one had to give up something. It was a price that could not be avoided. It was the same price the Galavrk had paid, the same price the explorers had paid. A price for tampering with something too vast to control. As the Nexus's energy consumed the Zalari, their civilization too began to unravel. Their bodies became fragmented, their minds shattered, lost in an endless web of time. Their once proud structures collapsed into non-existence, their ships scattered across the void, now ghostly remnants of a species that had come too close to the fire. And as the last of the Zalari vanished into the depths of the Nexus, their empire was no more. The Nexus, its power once again uncontained, now hung in a deep and silent corner of the galaxy, pulsing gently, waiting. Waiting for the next to come. Waiting for the next curious, ambitious species to reach for its power and fall victim to its chaotic force. For the story of the Nexus was not yet over. It had only just begun. And though the Zalari were gone, their story would serve as yet another warning to those who dared to follow in their footsteps. There were still countless stars to conquer, countless races yet to rise. And in the shadows, the Nexus would always be there, waiting, whispering, beckoning. And the cycle would continue. It always did. The universe, ever vast and indifferent, continued its endless dance. Suns were born and died, planets spun through the void, and civilizations rose and fell in their relentless pursuit of progress, power, and knowledge. The galaxy had witnessed countless cycles of ambition, and it would continue to do so, for the forces that shaped the cosmos were as eternal as time itself. Yet, among all the stories, the legacy of the Nexus endured, a story that had taken root deep within the fabric of the universe, whispered in the forgotten corridors of time, and etched into the hearts of those who dared to seek its power. Though the Zalari had disappeared, their ultimate fate sealed by their own recklessness, the Nexus had not been destroyed. Far from it. Its power, though dormant once more, lingered in the depths of space, untouched and waiting, as ancient as the stars themselves. It had consumed the Zalari, yes, but the cycle was far from over. In the centuries that followed, the galaxy moved on. New civilizations rose to prominence, and old ones slipped into obscurity, their histories fading like stardust. But the tale of the Nexus, though lost to many, was not entirely forgotten. There were those who had studied its effects, who had pieced together the fragmented records of the Galavrk and the explorers before them. And it was from these ancient texts, passed down through secretive scholars and isolated academies, that the first whispers of the Nexus's true nature began to spread again. It was the Zyrith, a race of nomadic traders and archaeologists, who first uncovered the long-lost remnants of the Zalari. Their ships, still scattered across the edges of the galaxy, were silent monuments to a failed ambition, their technology advanced but corrupted by the very energy they had tried to control. The Xyrath, being a naturally curious species, were drawn to these ruins. At first, they believed they had simply found the remains of a long-dead race, one of many scattered throughout the cosmos. But as they explored deeper, they began to find traces of the Nexus, its energy signatures, faint but undeniable. The Xyrath had heard the stories, of course the rumors of the Galoverk, the explorers, the Zolari, but they had long dismissed them as myth. But now, standing before the ruins of the Zolari, their skepticism began to fade. What they uncovered in the wreckage was unlike anything they had ever seen. Strange inscriptions, technological devices that pulsed with power, and artifacts that seemed to hum with an otherworldly energy, everything pointed to one thing: the Nexus was real. Driven by both greed and curiosity, the Xyrath began their own exploration of the Nexus's secrets. They were not the first to make this mistake, but they believed themselves to be wiser, more patient than those who had come before them. They would not rush. They would not fall into the same traps. They would study the Nexus, understand it, and unlock its true potential without suffering the same fate as the others. After all, the Xyrath had survived countless hardships and had learned from the mistakes of others. They had survived wars, famine, and disaster. Surely, they could control the power of the Nexus. As they began to experiment with the technology they had uncovered, they realized that the Nexus was more than just a source of energy. It was a doorway. A doorway to a realm of unimaginable possibilities. It was not simply an artifact to be studied or harnessed, it was a key that could unlock the very structure of reality itself. For the first time, the Xyrath truly understood what they were dealing with. But even as they marveled at their discovery, a subtle shift began to occur. The Nexus, though dormant for millennia, was awakening once again. The Xyrath, like so many before them, had triggered something that should never have been disturbed. It began with small anomalies. A flicker in the air, a strange distortion in the fabric of space around them. Then came the dreams. Xyrath scientists and explorers alike began to experience vivid, unsettling dreams, visions of other worlds, of alternate versions of themselves, of futures that were both familiar and alien. These dreams grew more intense with each passing day, and soon, the line between dream and reality began to blur. At first, the Xyrath dismissed it as the natural consequence of their exposure to the Nexus's power. Perhaps they had simply tapped too deeply into the fabric of reality, disrupting their minds in ways they couldn't yet understand. But as the dreams grew more vivid, and the disturbances in space-time grew more frequent, they began to realize that they were not simply experiencing the Nexus's power, they were being pulled into it. Their reality was beginning to fracture, and they were starting to lose their grip on what was real. The Xyrath had no choice but to accelerate their experiments, desperate to understand what they had uncovered, desperate to control the power they had unlocked. But as they delved deeper, they discovered something that would change everything. The Nexus, they realized, was not a tool to be used. It was alive. It was an ancient intelligence, a sentient force that had existed long before the galaxy itself. It was not something that could be harnessed or controlled, it was a force that reshaped reality according to its own will. The Nexus was not simply an artifact of immense power, it was a consciousness that fed on the very beings that sought to master it. Those who sought to control it would only become its playthings, pawns in a game that they could never hope to understand. And then, as the Xyrath began to comprehend the true nature of the Nexus, it was too late. The Nexus's grip on their reality tightened, and they found themselves slipping into alternate dimensions, into places beyond the bounds of time and space. Their bodies and minds began to unravel as the Nexus's power tore through their very essence, breaking them apart and remaking them in new, horrifying forms. Their once proud civilization began to disintegrate as their ships and cities faded into nothingness, replaced by an ever-expanding web of fractured realities. It was a death unlike any they had ever imagined. The Xyrath, like the Galoverk, the explorers, and the Zolari before them, had become victims of their own ambition. They had sought to control something beyond their comprehension, and in doing so, had condemned themselves to a fate of endless fragmentation and oblivion. Yet, even as the Zyrith's civilization crumbled, the Nexus remained. It was still there, still pulsing with the energy of the universe, still waiting for the next to come. It was a force of creation and destruction, of chaos and order, and it would always remain hidden, waiting, watching. Somewhere, in the deepest corners of the galaxy, there were those who still sought the power of the Nexus. They were out there, just as the Galavrk, the explorers, and the Zalari had been before them. And like the others, they would find themselves drawn to its call. For the Nexus was more than just a source of power. It was the universe's greatest secret, a force that could shape everything, yet would never be tamed. And as long as there were those who sought it, the cycle would continue. For the Nexus, it seemed, would never truly be defeated. It was the eternal enigma, the power that had shaped civilizations, destroyed empires, and unraveled the very fabric of existence. It was the ultimate test, one that no race, no being, could ever fully conquer. And as long as the galaxy turned, there would always be those who sought it and always be those who fell. And so, the story of the Nexus, of its endless power, would continue. It would remain untold in full, known only to those who dared to approach it, only to those who believed they could control it. And the cycle of discovery, ambition, and destruction would begin again, as it had always done before. But the true nature of the Nexus, the truth of what it was, and why it existed remained a mystery that no one had ever unraveled. Not the Galavrk. Not the explorers. Not the Zalari. And not the Zyrith. And in the end, perhaps that was the greatest power of all. The Nexus, a force beyond understanding, waiting in the dark, its mystery eternal, its influence inexorable. For it was not merely a tool of power, it was the force that shaped the very fate of the galaxy itself. And it was never meant to be understood.